The instant he said it, Subaru's flesh, buffeted by the gale, was disconnected from the world. All the senses of his body grew distant, and his mind, ruled to that point by the feeling that his internal organs were floating upward, lost track of reality. He was invited to a place where the notion of time did not exist. The next moment, "I love you." He felt like someone had whispered in his ear. An instant later, ferocious pain shot through Subaru's entire body, as if a thunderbolt were turning him to ash. From a place he could not see, the hands had invaded from the backside to grab his heart, wringing it roughly, but with care, as if checking to make sure it was still there. He truly felt the organ that governed his life being treated roughly, the foreign sensation of having someone else freely manipulate such a vital part. At the end of the world, not even allowed to let out a scream, the sounds of the wind and his own scream told him that, "I'm back!" Before Subaru's eyes, the white whale's huge mouth was open as it ferociously plunged after him. His confession of the taboo had increased the scent of the witch, and the increased hatred had overridden the demon beast's instincts. It let out a roar, its eye losing all sanity, seemingly forgetting about the conflict below as the white whale came rushing, seeking to erase Subaru's existence alone. Shrouded by a whirlwind, the white whale rapidly closed the distance between them, making Subaru afraid. In that situation, unable to do anything but freefall, Subaru had no way to evade the charge. At that rate, before ever reaching the ground, the white whale would catch him and he'd hurtle toward bad end 11 whale food. At that rate, anyway. "Reem!"
Yes, Subaru.
Subaru's shouting voice seemed to die on the wind, but she replied loud and clear. Simultaneously, with the white whale focused exclusively on Subaru, a flying spear of ice flew in right from the side and collided, intruding upon its open mouth, breaking a number of its yellow teeth and dulling its movements. Seizing the opportunity, Rem, on Petelgeuse's back, wrapped her morning star around Subaru's free-falling body. The chain wrapped around his hips, forcibly twisting him off his crash course and sending his innards to one side. "Gwa!" was the cry Subaru raised as he remembered tasting the same impact once before. It was the second time Rem had saved his falling body in that fashion. The first time was when Subaru's feet had slipped from the dragon carriage on their way to the royal capital.
I guess you can get used to anything.
After all, this time he had managed to avoid fainting, manipulated by the chain. Subaru's body fell somewhat roughly onto Petelgeuse's back, with Rem spreading her arms wide to receive him. Subaru ended up flying into her bosom. With a soft impact, Subaru's head was buried in a warm sensation as he exhaled.
I'm saved.
You are getting a treat.
What are you saying?
Subaru's cheeks reddened, and he hurriedly lifted his face from the embrace of Rem's breasts. Right beside them, the face of the white whale moved past. The surface of the ground exploded in a cloud of dirt, the force making the earth shudder. As they became enveloped in a gust like a blast of wind, Subaru directed Petelgeuse to sprint full force, and behind them, the white whale was taking flight, bursting out of the dirt cloud. The incredible force had messed up its head, and on top of that, the white whale forgot itself, raising a scream as it bore down on Subaru. In its tremendous excitement, he saw not even the slightest trace of when it leisurely swam in the sky. Its swimming had grown choppy, and its speed, outstripping the wind, was a good match for Petelgeuse. But in raw vigor, it was overwhelming. The earth split, and as its tail slapped the earth, the white whale ferociously chased them from behind. Subaru put all his weight forward, entrusting his life to Petelgeuse's reserves of strength. This was the land dragon that had earnestly and desperately exhausted all efforts for Subaru so far. Though it had been a short time, Subaru held enough faith to put his life on its shoulders.
I'm counting on you, Petelgeuse. You're a dragon, right? Show me how cool you are.
Petelgeuse neighed, and it felt like the speed went up a notch. The roar of the white whale resounded, and from the violent shaking of his eardrums and the world going blurry, he knew. Straight ahead. Straight ahead. We just need to run and go right past it. The white whale swam, ferociously chasing down Subaru to devour him whole. And then,
Take this, damn it.
the intervals between the flagrant sounds narrowed, drew closer, and finally, a mighty shadow was born, making a very heavy sound as the great flugel tree, fell straight toward the white whale. Magic crystal cannons, invisible blades, roaring attacks, destructive forces piled one on top of another had gouged out the roots of the great tree, which had grown over the course of 4 centuries and had been planted by a sage. As it came down, it crushed the enormous body of the demon beast flat. The great weight of the tree jutting to the heavens crashed straight into the white whale, pressing into it from above, against an attack that was in a different dimension compared to everything that came before it. Even the defense from white whale's tough outer hide was rendered meaningless. A scream and an incredible shockwave ran across the Lithus plains, with the blast blowing the mist away. Crushed under the great tree, the immobilized white whale shrieked in anguish, curling its tail. And yet, its vital energy was such that its body had sustained a blow so great, but its life had not been extinguished. The white whale writhed, trying to escape from the super-heavy mass, when at the tip of its nose.
I dedicate this to my wife, Theresia Van Astria.
Raising above his head the treasured sword he had borrowed from his master, a lone sword devil swooped down, to lower the curtain on that ferocious battle upon which hung life or death, vindictiveness spanning 14 years, and a history of conflict between man and the white whale spanning 400. Let us speak of the man named Wilhelm Trias. Wilhelm was born the 3rd son of the Trias family, a family of local nobles in the kingdom of Lugunica. The Trias family was an old, storied family granted land along the kingdom's northernmost border with the Holy Kingdom of Gusteco. This said, its fame as a family of warriors was a thing of the past. By the time of Wilhelm's birth, it had become a small, weak baronial family, with only a meager fief and a tiny populace to its name. In real terms, it was no more than an example of nobility fallen from grace. Wilhelm's brothers were well removed from him in age, and his upbringing had no connection to inheritance of family leadership. Furthermore, he, lacking the aptitude for civil government of his brothers, encountered wielding the sword as his one path leading to a future. The sword decorating the great hall of their mansion had once been used by a string of men in the Trias family to gain fame as warriors for the kingdom, but to the present Trias family it was simply a treasured sword to be admired on a wall. Even Wilhelm did not remember what triggered it. But when he drew the treasured sword, which he had never before even set hands upon, out of its scabbard, the way he was instantly captivated by the beauty of the steel, that he remembered distinctly. Before he knew it, he'd been taking the family sword on his own to the mountains out back, swinging it from morning till night. The first time he touched the sword, he was 8. He became accustomed to the length and weight of the blade, and when his limbs grew so that they were no longer mismatched, Wilhelm was 14 and the finest sword wielder of the domain.
I'll go to the capital and enter the royal army. Then I'll become a knight.
And it was at 14 years old that Wilhelm spoke those words and ran off from home, carrying the brainless dream any boy had thought of at least once. The trigger was on the night of a storm when he had an argument with his oldest brother. His brother had begun a "what will you do for your future?" lecture to Wilhelm, immersed in only the sword and minded to associate with brats and scoundrels in the territory. Through swinging a sword, he'd felt himself growing stronger and stronger, and that by itself had made him happy. And so, the older brother's words toward his younger, lacking any ambition for the future, were very strict. He had piled sound argument upon sound argument, and Wilhelm, deficient in words, spoke those words as the prelude to his flying out the door. He followed them with his trademark phrase, "You can't understand how I feel," and left, and in truth, the result was that Wilhelm left his family with nothing but a sword and a small amount of money. It was an unplanned departure, but Wilhelm was able to safely reach the royal capital. Wilhelm, triumphant as he arrived, made his way to the royal palace with all haste, and records note that he entered the royal army as a common soldier. If it were the current era, a stray ruffian arriving in an attempt to pass through the castle gate under such circumstances would have been rightfully and properly turned away. However, at that time there was a civil war with an alliance of demi-human tribes centered upon the eastern lands of the kingdom. The demi-human war had long continued, and the urgency was so great that no number of volunteers seemed enough. It was then that a boy appeared, selling himself as having fair skill in the sword. He was welcomed with both hands, and Wilhelm entered the royal army without the slightest hindrance. Thus, unconnected to setbacks or travails, Wilhelm stepped onto the field of his first battle. There, for the first time, the boy came to know the wall called reality. His skill with the blade, unmatched on his home soil, served nothing against veterans of the field of battle, and he was confronted by his own recklessness and conceit. Such was the hardship of youth, the baptism of one's first battle. Yes, by rights, it should have been like that for anyone, but in truth, without ever having faced live combat, Wilhelm's skill with the sword easily surpassed 15 normal youths put together.
What? They really weren't as tough as I thought.
In his first battle, the boy soldier had built a mountain of demi-human corpses, and from atop that mound, he thrust his sword into his attackers. No one could behold him and not feel afraid of the blood-stained future that awaited him. Wilhelm's abnormal strength in the sword was multiplied over the days he swung a sword in his homeland. From morning to evening, until his energy gave out, Wilhelm had lived by continuing to swing the sword every day, from age 8 to 14, 6 years without pause. Even once he had entered the Royal Army, his lifestyle of devoting every free moment to the sword did not change. Within the same unit, there were perhaps 1 or 2 people who reached out to Wilhelm, but he rebuffed their overtures, immersing himself only in the sword for days and months, until the boy became a man. Unbroken by reality, yet unsatisfied with himself, Wilhelm continued to swing a sword on the field of battle, unable to quench the feeling of gloom within him. With his blade, by rending the flesh of others, bathing in their blood, and taking the lives of his opponents, he proved that he was stronger. And he knew that only in those moments did a dark joy sprout within him. As knowledge of his skill with the sword spread, the name of the rural-born swordsman who refused all promotion, to knight or anything else, became known in both the Royal Army and the Demi-Human Alliance by the alternative name of Sword Devil, a devil of the sword, rushing across the battlefield, a devil of the sword, rushing across the battlefield and smiling only when cutting a person down. It was a name that became synonymous with fright and hatred, and both friend and foe steered wide of him. His exploits were beyond counting, and yet there was no question of promoting Wilhelm to knight. He did not associate with others, stoically devoting himself to the sword, rampaging on the battlefield without regard for his allies, leaping into the enemy formation, dancing as he made flowers of blood bloom. Such a man could not be worthy of a flowery title such as knight. In a kingdom with a long tradition of chivalry, Wilhelm's existence was loathed as an interloper regardless of his many services to the nation, and Wilhelm himself never once thought of changing that circumstance. He did not think like a knight, with their high pride, regard for the lives of others, and their tendency to polish the nobility of their own souls. When he fought, he killed people. He made their blood flow and smashed their lives to pieces. He, who took more joy in that than anything, was not suited for knighthood, and if it stopped him from being able to enjoy that, he wanted nothing to do with being a knight. His longing for battle was warped, but over a great deal of time, the heart of the young man named Wilhelm rotted, and it was when he was 18, when he had been in the Royal Army for 3 years, and when none in the army knew not the name Sword Devil, that a gap in that heart was born. She had beautiful long red hair, and from the side her face was so pretty it made him shiver. With the enlargement of the battle lines, Wilhelm was temporarily sent back to the royal capital from the front lines, forced to take leave that he suggested was unnecessary. Separated from the battlefield, and the rampant smell of blood, gunpowder, and death, Wilhelm, with too much time on his hands, slipped out of the castle gates with his beloved sword in hand, heading for the lower parts of the capital. Since running out on his own family, the treasured sword he had taken with him in lieu of a parting gift of coin had become greatly worn, but over the course of 10 years, he was used to that beloved blade like none other. It was not that he could not use other swords, but when he was bent on taking the lives of others, that sword was indeed best. Walking all alone, Wilhelm headed down a street in the lower quarter with no sign of life. His destination was the very edge of the royal capital, a run-down district that had been abandoned midway through its construction. The capital went from the nobles' district through Market Street, continuing through the Commons, and the abandoned district had apparently been conceived a ways back, but construction had been aborted quite some time prior, with no sign of resuming anytime soon. The word was, it would likely stay that way until the Civil War was resolved. In the morning, the unfinished district had no signs of human life, and if any did exist, it would be scum gathering there for no good purpose. They were cowards that would scatter like baby spiders if a little antagonism hit them. Of late, not even those outlaws had come close to the sword devil, wholly devoted to the blade, unafraid and unawares when he entered the unfinished district on his days off.
Just as well, I suppose.
The reason Wilhelm swung his sword in the lower city rather than at the parade grounds of the royal palace was so that his ears would be undisturbed by annoying voices. Immersing himself into a silent world where he was alone, Wilhelm no longer sought to measure his skill by crossing swords with others. He turned toward the swordsman. He imagined in the back of his mind, counterattacking his unleashed steel. The training he had continued since his youth always had Wilhelm crossing swords with the person he considered his greatest foe.
Aren't you a bad looker?
His eyes oozed with bloodlust. His lips were contorted in madness. The empty-eyed swordsman with whom he crossed swords every day was his reflection in the mirror. To Wilhelm, his greatest enemy was always himself. This was not in a philosophical sense, but rather a realistic view of his might. On the battlefield, he confronted his opponents. In other words, he took their lives. Having survived the battlefield, on the edge of life and death, there had been none on the field of battle to date that was mightier than he. Then what worthy rival was there to cross swords with than he, a man he could not kill no matter how hard he tried? Therefore, during his leave, he went to a place devoid of others to immerse in a sword dance against himself. For it was only there, in a sword drama none should ever yearn for in reality, that he truly felt what it meant to be alive.
I'm quite sorry.
That day, the sight of a beautiful girl was the foreign element wedging itself into the sword devil's world. To swing his sword and meet himself in deadly combat, Wilhelm, on his way to the unfinished district with that aim, stopped when he noticed a different guest ahead of him. Normally, the heart of the unfinished district Wilhelm used was a completely empty space. The footing was comparatively level, and the bread made it an ideal place for him. And yet, a foreign element rested in Wilhelm's place of relaxation, tilting its head slightly toward him.
To think someone would come to a place like this, and so early in the morning?
The girl addressed Wilhelm with a little smile, but Wilhelm responded to the greeting with a simple slap of his antagonistic aura to drive her away. He felt as if he was shooing away an annoying insect. An amateur, amid such antagonism, would beat a hasty retreat. Even a man of skill would likely perceive Wilhelm's level of skill and do likewise, but the girl did nothing of the sort.
What is the matter? Such a scary face.
She parried Wilhelm's antagonism, continuing her words as if it were nothing. Wilhelm felt annoyed, clicking his tongue. This was an opponent upon whom such hostility was ineffective. In other words, someone completely unrelated to the martial arts. At the very least, someone upon whom violence was effective would have shown some reaction to Wilhelm's antagonism. But to someone unconnected to such things, it was simple coercion. Depending on the opponent, someone might even receive it with a simple narrowing of the eyes. In the case of the individual before him, she was a shining example of the latter.
Woman, what are you doing here on a morning like this?
He hurled abuse at her, but she had yet to release Wilhelm from her gaze. The girl made a little at Wilhelm's words, then said,
I would like to ask you the very same thing, but that would be a bit too mean, yes? Your face says you have no sense of humor.
There are many dangerous men in this area. I cannot approve of a woman for walking around it alone.
Are you worried about me?
It is possible that I am one of those dangerous men.
Wilhelm replied sarcastically to the girl's light-hearted comment, making a sound with the hilt of his sword to announce the presence of his weapon. But the girl did not turn an eye to Wilhelm's action, pointing behind her as she said,
Over here.
The girl, sitting on a stairway, shifted her finger to a building opposite that against which she leaned. As it was a place Wilhelm could not see from his position, his brows furrowed at being invited to come closer.
It is not that I do not wish to see, but
Never mind that. Come on, come on.
Wilhelm's cheek twitched at the tone, like that used when coddling a child, but he calmed himself and went over to her. He walked alongside the woman higher up on the stairway, leaning forward to peer at what lay on the other side. On the other side, the hot rays of the morning sun were shining on a broad yellow flower garden. With Wilhelm at a loss for words, the girl lowered her voice and confessed her secret to him in a whisper.
They stopped maintaining this district quite some time ago, yes. I thought no one would come, so I planted some flowers. I came over to see the results for myself.
Wilhelm had walked that way many times, but not once had he noticed the presence of the flower garden, even though all it would have taken to see them was for him to stretch his back a little higher and broaden his vision. With Wilhelm's mouth remaining closed, the girl looked at the side of his face and asked,
Do you like flowers?
He turned to her, seeing the small, gentle smile her face made as he stared.
No, I hate them.
He replied in a low voice, curling his lips. From then on, Wilhelm and the girl continued to encounter each other from time to time. On his days off, Wilhelm would walk to the unfinished district in the morning, only to find her having arrived ahead of him, bathed in a quiet wind as she gazed at the flowers. Then, when she noticed that Wilhelm had arrived, she would ask him.
Do you like flowers now?
He would deny it with a shake of his head, immersing himself in swinging the sword, acting like he had forgotten her very existence. When his sweat flowed and he raised his head, finishing his deadly struggle with himself, he would see the girl still there.
You really have a lot of time on your hands.
He'd always say in a sarcastic voice. He thought that, bit by bit, the amount of time they spent speaking gradually increased. They always spoke after he'd swung his sword, but he began to exchange a few words before swinging his sword as well, and the conversations after he swung his sword also became a little longer. Gradually, he went to that place at an even earlier hour, sometimes arriving to the flower garden before the girl.
Ah, you are so early today.
The girl would say, a regretful smile coming over her. It must have been 3 months since meeting her like that before they'd exchanged names. The girl called herself Theresia, adding, for now, sticking out her tongue a little. When Wilhelm replied with his introduction, she pouted when he said, I've been calling you Flower Girl until now. He thought that exchanging names meant intruding onto each other's circumstances to some small degree. To date, their exchanges had been harmless and inoffensive, but their quality steadily began to change.
Why do you swing the sword?
One day, Theresia asked him,
Because it is all I have.
Without a moment's concern, Wilhelm replied. As was typical, Wilhelm's return to military duty was greeted with days filled with the scent of fresh blood. In due course, the civil war with the demi-humans had intensified. Over and over, he casually carried out his missions, slipping past an enemy's magic into his flank, slicing him from toe to chin. He rushed overland, broke through the wind, flew into the enemy camp, and sent the general's head flying. He returned to his own camp with the head impaled on the tip of his sword, and bathed in gazes of acclamation and fright, he exhaled. Suddenly, he realized that on the battlefield below his feet, even as blood flowed, there were flowers blooming, swaying in the wind, and now, without being conscious of it, he took care not to tread upon them.
Do you like flowers now?
No, I hate them.
Why do you swing the sword?
Because that is all I have.
It was his ritualistic exchange with Theresia. When they spoke about flowers, Wilhelm was able to reply with a small smile. But when they spoke of the sword somehow, it felt painful to give his stock reply. Why did he swing a sword? I have nothing else, he thought day after day. And there, his thought process had ended. When he seriously pondered the question in search of an answer, Wilhelm turned back all the way to the day he had first held a sword in his hand. At the time, Wilhelm was yet to know that the sword in his hand would be bathed in blood. When Wilhelm saw himself reflected in the light gleaming off the pristine steel blade, what had he thought? One day, still in a vortex of thought, unable to come up with an answer, his feet took him to the usual place. His steps grew heavy, for he was filled with gloom at how he would face the girl waiting for him. Perhaps it was the first time in his life that he had worried his head about such a thing. Had he not continued swinging a sword without needing to think? Just when he had resolved to give such a nasty reply,
Wilhelm.
The girl, there in place ahead of him, looked back with a small smile as she called his name. Suddenly, his soul shuddered. His feet halted, and he could not help feeling nauseous. Suddenly, Wilhelm was assailed by a realization that seemed to crush his body. When he sought to cast everything aside with such a conclusion that he had swung the sword without a thought, a variety of things he'd stopped thinking about and set aside suddenly spewed forth. He didn't understand the reason. The trigger wasn't set in stone. That moment, the bulwark he had raised so long ago had abruptly reached its limit. Why did he swing the sword? Why had he started to swing the sword? He yearned for the glimmer of the sword, the strength, the purity of living by the blade. There was that too. There was that also. But surely, it had begun somewhere else.
I have to do what my older brothers can't.
It was because swinging a sword was a field largely neglected by his older brothers. Yet even so, it was because his brothers sought to protect their family in their own way that he, so useless to them, sought his own, different way to defend them. Was that not why he was captivated by the strength and glimmer of a blade?
Do you like flowers now?
I do not hate them.
Why do you swing the sword?
It is all I could think of no other way to protect others.
Ever since, the previous ritualistic exchange of words ceased to be. In place, he thought that their topics shifted around quite a bit. Before he realized it, he was heading there not with the aim of swinging a sword, but to meet Theresia. In a place where he should have been swinging his sword without a thought, his head somehow came to find that insufficient, and topics shifted to places away from the sword. Until then, his fighting style had been to charge single-handedly into the enemy formation and take as many heads as he could, but somewhere along the line, that changed to him running around with a focus on diminishing harm to his allies any way he could. The sight of him prioritizing his companion's safety over slaying the enemy naturally resulted in a change in how others saw him. Old war comrades that had stuck with Wilhelm since his bad behavior days were both delighted at the change in him and conflicted by it. For the number of people who spoke to him and that he spoke to both increased. Previously unheard of calls for his promotion to knight arose, and he spent only a small amount of time weighing the matter before accepting. Deep down, he too found having such prestige better than naught.
There were calls for my promotion, so I became a knight.
I see. Congratulations. That makes you one step closer to your dream, doesn't it?
Dream?
You took up the sword to protect people, didn't you? And a knight is someone who protects others.
He felt that, among the things he wanted to protect, her smiling face stood out. More time passed, having become a knight and coming into contact with more people within the army, the information reaching his ears naturally increased. The deeply bogged-down civil war continued, with an advance on one front matched by retreat from the next. Wilhelm, too, experienced not only victorious battles but defeats as well. Along the way, he spent his days continuing to struggle to protect those within reach of his sword, while bitterly regretting those things that were beyond his reach. It was by happenstance he heard that the fires of war had shifted to the land of the House of Trias. That fact casually reached Wilhelm's ears from a newfound companion inside the army, namely, that the civil. ReZero by Tapi Nagatsuki, produced by Six-Tail Novel with Artale AI. If you are interested in creating your own audiobook like this, visit Artale AI and claim free premium with code ARTALE. The war that had begun in the kingdom's east had broadened, reaching all the way to the Trias domain in the north. There was no order given. So long as a knight did not forget the position allotted to him, it was impermissible for him to act on his own. But to Wilhelm, embracing once more his feelings from the time he first grasped a sword, such things meant nothing. By the time he rushed to his beloved homeland, the advancing enemy army had already turned it into a sea of flame. When the scenery that he had abandoned over 5 years before faded before the reality of more familiar sights, Wilhelm drew his blade, raised his voice, and dashed into the bloody mists. He cut down his foes, trod over their corpses, and shouted until his throat grew parched as he bathed in blood spatter. The enemy's numbers were overwhelming. There were no reinforcements, and it was a land weak in fighting strength to begin with. Until that point, he had meant to fight in battle on his strength alone. But he learned the price, taking one wound and then another, becoming unable to move. Collapsing atop a pile of corpses, crushed before the numbers of the enemy force that still showed no signs of running dry, Wilhelm understood that death was coming before his eyes. The beloved sword that had long been with him fell by the wayside, for his fingertips were too numb and lifeless to hold it aloft. With his eyes closed, he looked back at half his life, during which he had done nothing but swing a sword. It was a lonely life, a life with nothing.
Along with that conclusion came a momentary sight, and along the way, one face after another flashed before him. He remembered them one by one. His parents, his two older brothers, the bad friends he had hung out with in the domain, his comrades and superiors from the Royal Army, and finally that of Theresia, with flowers behind her. I don't want to die. It should have been his true hope to live by the sword and die by the sword, but faced with the actual result of his way of life, devoting everything to steel, Wilhelm, with the end he should have desired before his eyes, was stricken with an unbearable feeling of loneliness.
The enemy soldier that had cut down so many of his comrades would not honor the final words he had let slip. Inhumanly large in body, they mercilessly swung their great sword down at Wilhelm. He would eternally remember the beauty of the slash that lashed out. A storm of swords blew, and of course the demi-human's limbs, head, and torso were cleanly severed. A great uproar spread among the enemy force, but the racing silver flash was faster, easily inflicting death in large quantities. Splattered blood rose up, the death cries did not cease, and the demi-human's lives were shaved away. The all-too-vivid slashes did not register even with those struck by them, managing no expression as their lives were snuffed out. Whether such acts were cruelty or mercy, no one knew.
As to what was known, there was but a single thing. Surely he could not reach that realm of the blade in a lifetime, or even eternity. He had lived by swinging a blade, devoting the majority of his not overly long life to that purpose. And because of that, it was Wilhelm who could keenly comprehend the heights of the swordsmanship repeated over and over before his very eyes. So, too, the fact that it was a realm he, a man of no talent, could never reach.
If Wilhelm had created a valley of bloody mist in his homeland, it was truly a sea of blood that spread before his eyes. The literal mountain of corpses piled atop one another had no comparison. The silver flash did not cease its dance until every demi-human invading the Trias lands had ceased breathing. Having witnessed the overwhelming slaughter to the end, he was carried out by late-arriving comrades from the Royal Army. They shouted various things and tended to his wounds, but Wilhelm never took his eyes off the sight. Finally, the slender long sword wavered, and the sword fighter finally walked off. Wilhelm shuddered when he realized that the sword fighter had not been bathed in a single drop of spattered blood. He reached out with his hand but could not reach the back, moving away. Most likely, the distance between them was not a physical one alone. It was when he returned to the royal capital that he heard the true name of the one bearing the alias of Sword Saint. It was around the same time that the name of the Sword Saint began to reverberate in every land in the stead of Wilhelm the Sword Devil. Sword Saint, once upon a time, that was the legendary being who would cut down the witch, bringing calamity to the world. To that day, the men beloved by the sword god were of the blood of that single family, and it was through that direct bloodline that one generation Superman was born after another. The name of the Sword Saint of that generation had never been public even once. So, too, until that time. It was several days later that his battle wounds had healed, and he made his way to the usual place. Gripping the hilt of his beloved sword, Wilhelm quietly trod the sword as he headed for the flower garden. He was certain she would be there. And, in accordance with his firm belief, Theresia was sitting in that place, no different from before. Before she could look back, Wilhelm drew his sword and leaped at her. Just before the semicircular cut would have split the girl's head, she caught the tip of his sword with 2 fingertips, bringing it to a halt. A sound of wonder caught in Wilhelm's throat as a malevolent smile came over his lips.
Is that so?
Were you laughing at me? Go ahead and laugh, Theresia. No, Sword Saint, Theresia van Astria.
With all his might, he raised his sword high and sliced at her again, but she evaded by a single hair in an undisturbed motion. A moment after the dance of her red hair stole his eyes, his feet were swept from under him, unable to break the fall as he was cruelly sent crashing down. Even without a sword in her hand, the sword devil's blade could not reach the sword saint. An impregnable wall, a preposterous difference was now evident between them.
I will not be coming here anymore.
Several times more, Wilhelm went slicing after her, and each time, he was struck by a counterattack and beaten to the ground. At some point, his beloved blade was snatched from him, and as it rested in her hand, he was beaten by the hilt until he was unable to move. So far, so very weak. He could not reach. It was not enough.
Don't hold a sword with that face.
I do, for I am the sword saint. I did not understand the reason why I was, but I understand now.
Reason, you say?
You swing the sword to protect others. I think I can do that too.
It was Wilhelm who had given Theresia, the girl who loved flowers, who could find no meaning in gripping a sword, that reason all the more because she was stronger than anyone, the furthest beyond the reach of anyone's sword.
Wade, Theresia. I'll take your sword from you, as if I care about your blessing or your role. Don't underestimate swinging the sword, or the beauty of the blade. Sword Saint.
The woman did not stop. Her back grew distant. All that was left behind was a lone, foolish devil, speaking of the sword to her, who was loved by the sword. Afterward, the two would never meet there again. The sword devil vanished from the royal army. In his place, the name of the sword saint spread within it. A knight worth 1,000 men, with hard fighting by Theresia, the embodiment of those words, the civil war tilted in their favor. Though a single person, her martial feats were beyond the realm of any individual, and the alias of Sword Saint resounded even the demi-humans versed in the old legends despaired. It took 2 years after the Sword Saint emerged on the battlefield for the civil war to end. The demi-human alliance lost those who carried it upon their shoulders, and when peace talks were carried out somewhere between the current leaders on both sides, it announced that at minimum, the fight between those bearing swords had come to an end. Blessed by the end of the long-running civil war, the royal capital gently opened up and began to flower. A ceremony had been planned where a powerful, beautiful sword saint would be granted several medals. People throughout the kingdom traveled to the capital to glimpse the sight of Theresia, the red-haired sword saint, the hero whose passion had single-handedly brought the long-suffering from wild war to an end. It was then that the sword devil unexpectedly descended, as if to slice that passion asunder. The soldiers on guard became agitated from the incredible antagonism rising from a man with a naked blade in his hand. But it was none other than the sword saint, the flower of the ceremony, who checked them and advanced to the fore. Each turned their sword toward the other, almost as if walking onto a prearranged stage. When her long red hair fluttered in the wind, none failed to hold their breath at the sight of her facing the intruder. It was difficult to find words for an appearance with such refined beauty, yet so at one with the blade. The malevolent antagonism of the individual facing the sword saint was the polar opposite. Both the brown mantle over him and the skin underneath were filthy all over from rainwater and caked mud. Even the sword in his hand was meager compared to the ceremonial holy blade the sword saint held in hers. The blade of the well-made sword was crooked, with reddish-brown rust all over it. Though the king was seated on the same stage they were on, he halted the knights attempting to go to the sword saint's aid. When the sword saint stepped forward and her swordplay glimmered, all pulled their chins back, and none raised a voice, watching in silence. At the beginning, no doubt many found the two figures having vanished from their sight. Blade recoiled from blade again and again. High-pitched sounds shot past the spectators. There was a chain of glimmers and sounds of steel as the two figures danced upon the stage at a dizzying speed. Soon, those witnessing the spectacle had lost their voices, their hearts going to and fro, overwhelmed with a vast sense of admiration. They battled with incredible force, switching where they stood, from the ground to the walls to the very air as the swordplay of the two sword fighters blurred. Some even realized that the sight had brought them to tears. But as they listened to the orchestra of echoing steel, they instinctively shuddered, intoxicated by the sublime sight. They thought, is this really a realm that people can reach? Can the beauty of the sword truly instill such deep feelings in others? Their swordplay intermingled with locked swords, flashing tips, and repeated recoils. And finally, the discolored blade snapped in half, its tips sent flying, spinning round and round in the air. Then, the hand in which rested the sword saint's ceremonial sword.
Victory, victory is mine.
The holy sword audibly dropped to the ground, and the broken sword's warped tip came to rest just short of the sword saint's throat. The spectacle made time stop, and all knew. The sword saint had lost.
You're weaker than me, so you have no reason to wield a sword.
If not me, then who?
I'll carry on your reason for swinging a sword. You just need to become my reason to swing one.
He lifted up the hood of his outer garment. The sullen face of Wilhelm glared at Theresia from under the dark, filthy cloth. Theresia shook her head a little at Wilhelm's behavior.
You are a terrible person. You've made a person's determination, resolve, everything all go to waste.
I'll carry on everything that's gone to waste. You can forget about gripping a sword and just take it. Yes, that's it. You can raise flowers and live in peace and quiet behind me.
Protected by your sword.
That's right.
You'll protect me?
That's right.
Theresia placed her hand against the flat of the sword thrust toward her, taking a step forward. The two faced each other, close enough to feel each other's breath. Tears welled in Theresia's damp eyes, but they only conveyed her little smile as they fell.
Do you like flowers?
I stopped hating them.
Why do you swing the sword?
To protect you.
The distance closed as their faces drew close. Finally, it vanished. When she drew back from the touch of their lips, Theresia's cheeks were red. She gently stared at Wilhelm as she asked,
Do you love me?
You know I do.
Just then, the people enthralled by the dancing of swords regained their senses, and a great throng of guards pressed close. Wilhelm's shoulders sank when he saw familiar faces among the soldiers rushing over. Theresia's cheeks puffed up at his dismissive demeanor. Their smiles were like those they had exchanged during the days they spent gazing at the flowers.
Sometimes a woman wants to hear the words.
Scratching his head with a guilty expression on his face, Wilhelm reluctantly looked back at Theresia, drawing his face close to her ear as he whispered,
Someday, when I feel like it.
and thus he glossed over the embarrassing words.
Oh,
The shout the aged swordsman raised seemed to trail behind him. Whaled blood spewed from the fresh blade wound, dyeing the sky scarlet. He appeared wounded all over his body. Then, as before, blood seemed to be dripping from his left shoulder, but the blood spatter drenching his entire body had mixed with his own blood, turning its color to black. Over such a brief period of time, no more could be expected from healing magic than stopping the bleeding and restoring a small amount of endurance. He was still in a gravely injured state, told he must have complete rest. But seeing Wilhelm as he was that moment, none could laugh him off as an old man on death's door. Seeing the gleam in both his eyes, seeing the strength in his steps as he raced, seeing the vividness of the slashes of the sword he wielded, hearing the ear-splitting cry echoing forth, and captivated by the glimmer of his soul, none could laugh off the old man's accumulated life as that of a fool. His blade ran, a scream rose, and the white whale's enormous suffering body was racked with intense pain. With the demon beast crushed under the great tree, unable to move, the sword devil racing along its back did not hesitate to use his blade. The slash begun at the tip of its head ran down its back and reached its tail, and when the sword devil stood upon the ground, he turned right around, rending its belly on his way back to the head, and one swing, sharp, deep, and very, very long, the single flash of silver cut the white whale in two. With a leap, the sword devil came down onto the tip of the unmoving white whale's nose once more. He shook the blood off his drenched sword as he and the white whale looked each other eye to eye, their two fates merging together.
I have no intention of speaking ill to you. There is no use explaining good and evil to a beast. Between you and me, there is only the law of life and death. The weak are cut down by the strong. Sleep eternally.
Leaving behind one last little murmur, light faded from the white whale's eyes. Its enormous body went limp, and when it collapsed, the earth shuddered. The droplets of its fresh blood formed a muddy river. No one could put the feeling of blood running underfoot into words. A silence befell the Lippus highway. And then,
It's over, Theresia. It's finally...
atop the head of the immobile white whale, Wilhelm turned his face skyward. When the treasured sword fell from his hand, he brought that hand up to cover his face, and with a quivering voice, the weaponless sword devil said,
Theresia,
The voice was raspy, but there was boundless, undiminished love within it.
I love you.
They were words of love only Wilhelm knew, things he had never told her. They contained feelings accumulated over many years, words he had not spoken even once to the one he loved most, right up to the day he lost her. Finally, after the passage of decades, Wilhelm had voiced the words with which he should have answered her questions so long ago. Atop the corpse of the white whale, his sword fallen from his grasp, the sword devil cried out his love for his departed wife, and he wept.
Here, the white whale has fallen.
Haltingly, the sound of a stirring voice echoed across the silence of the nighttime plain. At that voice, the men, lost for words, lifted their faces. Their gazes poured over a young woman calmly advancing to the fore on the back of a white land dragon. Her long green hair was frayed, and she was cruelly adorned by wounds suffered at the height of the battle. Her face sullied by her own blood, a most sorry state for her to be seen in. And yet, in their eyes, the girl had never shone brighter. That was natural for those who judge the worth of others by the glimmer of their souls. With the knights gazing upon her, the gallant young woman lifted her face and took a deep breath. Having lent her treasured sword, Crusch's scabbard was currently empty. Accordingly, she thrust her fist toward the heavens, as if to show her closed hand to all present as she announced,
The demon beast of mist that menaced the world across 4 centuries of life has been slain by Wilhelm von Astria. In this battle, we are victorious.
With their lord loudly proclaiming victory, the surviving knights raised shouts of joy. With mist clearing over the plains, signs of night returned once more, a proper night, with moonlight illuminating the people on the ground far and wide. And there, after 400 years, the battle of the white whale came to an end. An elated clamor spread across the moonlight-filled plains. The light of the moon reflected off the swords the knights raised high, with the glow of that light making the scene beautiful indeed. The white whale's enormous body rested on its side beneath the great flugel tree as a zealous throng rushed to surround it. Everyone exulted in victory, with tears of gratitude flowing that their long-cherished wish had been fulfilled. As if to pour water over their joy, 2 powerful roars made the air over the Lippus highway shake, as if to paint over everyone's pleasure. Separate from the white whale that had been slain, there were 2 white whale offshoots that had lost the main body. Acknowledging the death of the main body, the offshoots above the ground writhed around, and their vastness and solidity began to diminish. With their supply of mana from the main body severed, they were increasingly unable to maintain their flesh. They looked pathetic. Left to their own devices, they would surely dissipate within minutes.
Crude.
With that one disparaging word cutting them off, an arm swung, unleashing an invisible blade. Accompanied by a gale, the slicing wind entered one whale through its head, slicing the agonized white whale's outer hide in half with ease, and with its giant body neatly divided into left and right, the being literally dissipated. With a single blow of an Expeditionary Force magic crystal cannon, the remaining whale broke into the mist from whence it came, its mana blown away, melting into the wind, whereupon its enormous body vanished completely. That told them, in a true sense, the battle to subjugate the white whale was at an end.
We cannot simply exult in this.
Touching a hand to her breast, Crusch was aware of the jubilation inside herself, but she shook her head, refusing to let the deep emotions show on her face. With everyone's cooperation, they defeated the evil demon beast, and everyone lived happily ever after. The end. In reality, the tale would not end so neatly. Such an ending was only permitted in fairy tales. Reality continued after the end of the tale, with a never-ending supply of things that had to be done. They had to provide relief for the wounded survivors and courteous burials for the dead, leaving no corpses behind. And when Crusch thought of such follow-up, she realized, at a place a little removed from the white whale, a man who had served with distinction was desperately raising his voice.
Rim! Rim! Open your eyes!
Subaru lifted the girl in his arms, his face pale as he desperately called out to her. The land dragon came right up to them, nuzzling them with its black nose in an act of concern. But at that moment, Subaru harbored a sense of nervousness so great that he did not respond to even that land dragon's consideration.
Subaru's plan to make the white whale chase his scent and crush it under the great tree was a splendid success. Some had raised their voices in objection, reluctant to cut down a historical tree. But the Beast Man mercenaries were rationalists with no such compunctions, and when even Crusch deemed it necessary, opinion easily shifted to his favor. Accordingly, Subaru, drafter of the plan, saw the operation through, shouldering no small risk in the process, resulting in achievement in battle that one might call second to none. But if this was the price he had to pay, it was the smallest of small comforts. This is no good, please, Rem, if you're not here.
Before his eyes, Rem calmly rested with her eyes closed, completely unresponsive to Subaru's voice. There was no sign that conscious will was conveyed to her limp limbs, and the tearful voice calling her name seemed to pass right through her ears, a cry into empty space.
Under ferocious pursuit by the white whale, they'd raced as the falling trunk of the great tree loomed near. The heavy weight of the great tree struck the demon beast squarely, with a loud crash to earth and a shockwave that flew indiscriminately throughout the area, and amid it was the sight of Subaru and Rem running right alongside. They were engulfed by the shockwave, losing track of which way was up, and Subaru recalled that he was protected by a warm sensation during that. The instant he grasped that feeling, there was a roaring sound from an incredible impact as he and the sensation were slammed onto the ground. Slipping through the gaps of Subaru's vague consciousness was the realization that he was lying on the ground. And lifting his head, he realized who had embraced him, and that it was her body that had embraced his to the very end.
Subaru.
Rim?
With a twitch, her eyelids shuddered, and Subaru was reflected in the dim gleam beneath them. Reflected in her eyes, he looked so very weak, almost as if he was subconsciously recognizing the reality of what was unfolding before his eyes, when he said,
I'm so G, yeah, it's me, Subaru. Ram, your body?
Subaru, I'm so glad. You are safe.
His throat choked up. For Rem, seeing Subaru unable to even get out the tearful words of concern for her the way he wanted, was smiling at him in visible relief, as if taking no heed of her own injuries, happy so long as Subaru was safe.
What happened to the demon beast?
It went down. We nailed it. It worked out. Everything worked out. I'm not hurt either. It's all thanks to you.
Is that so?
Then Master Rosewall and Lady Amelia
Shall surely be all right.
It'll work out. Leave it to me. So, Rem, you don't have to say anything right now. Just rest. No, don't. Close your eyes. Aw, crap. What should I do?
She didn't need to force herself to speak, but if Rem spoke no words, he couldn't wipe away his own unease. Subaru was nervous, almost as if the relentless coercive power of fate might yet snatch her life from his hand. He didn't know what he ought to do. He didn't know what was best to do. Not knowing what to do, Subaru couldn't help holding her hand and embracing her with his other arm as strongly as he could.
That hurts, Subaru.
Sorry, my bad. But if I don't do this, you'll go off some way and...
I shall not go anywhere. I shall be at your side, Subaru.
Rem gave Subaru a little smile, like that of a mother consoling an unreasonable child in tears, when strength suddenly left her body. Subaru's throat froze in fear as he felt her body go soft in his arms. Inside his ears, he heard the sound of blood draining, of anything and everything leaving him behind.
Rem! Rem! Please, Rem, open your eyes.
Somehow, I'm very sleepy. I'm sorry. Let me sleep just a little, and when I wake, soon, for your sake, I shall be.
Never mind all that. You don't need to do anything. It's fine if you're just together with me, so please, Rem.
Even though she was right within his arms, Subaru wrung out his voice, desperately trying to hold fast to her as she began gradually slipping away. And yet, though Rem was right before his eyes, his voice did not reach.
May I say something? Selfish?
Say it, say anything. I'll listen to anything. I'll do anything. So.
In a broken voice, in a frail tone, Rem looked up at Subaru and made a little murmur.
I want you to say that you love me.
Tears welling up forced Subaru's eyes open as he shook his head side to side. Then, he drew his face close to hers and told her.
I love you. I really love you. Of course I do. I can't manage without you.
They were words from his heart of hearts. Subaru poured all his unembellished true feelings into the words he spoke that instant. He couldn't have made it that far without her. He couldn't live without her.
Ah, I'm so happy.
Receiving Subaru's confession, tears came out through her closed eyes. Rem's cheeks suddenly reddened as she happily accepted the words tossed toward her. With that, Subaru felt that the last of her strength had truly left her.
Wait,
I love you, Subaru.
don't kid around. Stay with me. Am I gonna have nothing but regrets again? He could not bear a future that did not have her in it. He understood that well before, and now her existence loomed far, far larger. That was why. I don't want to laugh and talk about the future without you.
In that future, can I be by your side?
Of course, I won't let you be anywhere else.
Closing his eyes, Subaru wiped away the rising tears before staring straight at Rem. And then, he stated firmly.
You're mine. I won't hand you to anyone.
I shall take that as a commitment.
Huh?
Abruptly, Subaru let out his voice like an idiot at the highly intellectual reply. As he did so, Rem slowly opened the eyes she had kept closed all that time, proceeding to sit up inside his arms. Then, with Subaru dumbfounded, unable to grasp the situation, she tilted her head and smiled at him.
You have promised I shall be at your side, Subaru. You cannot take it back now.
Where had the sight of her dying gone? In a teasing, toying way, Rem closed one eye and gently touched Subaru's lips. Crestfallen, Subaru's strength gave out from his shoulders down as he sank to the ground.
Why, you!
Yes, I am Subaru's Rem, in name and fact.
Hearing her trademark reply, now even more brazen, Subaru could not follow up his words. Even so, even if by rights it was a scene where he ought to be shaking with anger, the fact that the girl before his eyes was safe took precedence, leaving him too happy to do so.
We have both aired our true feelings, so that's really overkill.
Girls are strong when they become honest about love, Subaru.
Subaru was flustered by how Rem no longer had any intention of hiding her love for him. More embarrassed than anything else, Subaru's face reddened as he let out a small breath and confessed,
If you died, I was about to die too.
I am a lucky woman that you think so much of me.
I'm not kidding either.
Rem replied with a little smile, but Subaru had answered with his true and sincere feelings. If Subaru had lost Rem, he would have most certainly attempted to do it all over again. Even if the chance to do things over was not granted to him, there was no doubt he'd have tried anyway. That was how large a place Rem's existence now occupied in Subaru's heart.
I absolutely must not die then.
Darn right. I won't let you die, even if it kills me.
Subaru drew his face to hers, and their foreheads touched as they looked at each other from so very close. Rem gazed adoringly at Subaru's gesture, and it was hard for Subaru to just stay there with her close enough that their breaths touched. Naturally, his gaze was drawn in by her pink lips, and he felt his heart beat just a little faster.
Could you two wrap it up already? Meow?
Ferris, looking exasperated from having watched from a distance as the two flirted, butted in to break things up at the most important juncture. Apparently, he'd been watching the whole time. Subaru was sure he'd done it on purpose.
You're so cute, Subaru. Calling out to her so desperately, Meow, I can't live without you. Shut up! You're annoying! You should reflect on your bad taste of staring so much. In the first place, if you thought about it calmly, you'd have understood. Meow. Fairy has to go around treating the wounded immediately, so that meant Rem's injuries weren't life-threatening. Meow. Like I can think about it calmly. An important girl who told me she loved me was hurt and unconscious. Of course I couldn't think straight. Boys are so pure of heart, unable to say certain things, except in a few places. Meow.
As Subaru vented with angry shouts, Ferris smiled flippantly as he turned his palm toward Rem, a blue glow coming over it. Even while the look on Ferris's face struck Subaru with unquenchable annoyance, he couldn't conceal his relief at how Rem's expression gradually grew softer. There were many things in what Ferris said that he couldn't just come out and agree with, but the part about triage, prioritizing healing the most heavily wounded, was no doubt the honest truth. Giving shabby treatment to Rem, part of another camp's fighting strength, and to Subaru, both key players in bringing down the white whale, was not something his master would ever permit. As Subaru's thoughts reached that conclusion, that very same master, Crusch, appeared, calmly stepping over grass.
You are all right, Subaru Natsuki?
Even sullied by blood and mud, the sight of Crusch walking straight with her back tall was beautiful. Naturally, the elegance she had in no way lost wafted around her, and so too the vestiges of the battle. The beautiful woman seemed like the living embodiment of the word Valkyrie.
Somehow or other, yeah. Glad you look all right yourself.
I am, but the expeditionary force is depleted to no small extent. Nor will those slain by the white whale return.
When Subaru responded, waving up to her, Crusch drew her chin in, shifting her head pensively. Her gaze shifted toward the corpse of the white whale, still crushed under the great tree. Over there, the survivors of the expeditionary force with comparatively light injuries had gathered together. Apparently, their first order of business was to get the great tree off the white whale.
What are they doing over there?
We must transport the white whale's corpse. With even the great flugel tree sacrificed for the operation, some sort of evidence is required. It is what comes after the battle that concerns me.
Transport that huge corpse?
Subaru wanted to make sure he hadn't misheard, but Crusch's demeanor was unchanged. Subaru hurriedly returned his gaze to the white whale, observing the giant body over maybe 150 feet in length as he remarked.
Doesn't seem doable, does it?
Failure is not an option. The creature was a menace that swam through the skies for 400 years. At worst, we may have to return with the head alone.
Crusch's words seemed like an exaggeration, but Subaru thought it over and realized her judgment was correct. To begin with, from Crusch's point of view, the subjugation of the white whale was a success she wanted all to see to advance herself in the royal selection. Naturally, Crusch was not someone of such low character as to prioritize achievements over all else, which the battle had amply demonstrated. But the achievement was simply that grand. She was already the most influential of the royal candidates, with high support among the populace, and if this earned her favor with the merchant faction, which had been the final holdout, Crusch's position would be even more rock solid.
Wait, did I wind up pushing us into a bad spot? The degree of aid he had provided an opponent finally dawned on Subaru. There was no going back either. He'd done everything so that he could return to Amelia's camp, but he wondered if he'd overdone it even so. Fearing as much, Subaru held far too late regrets.
Your face has become rather dark. It does not look like the face of the hero who brought down the white whale.
I'll get raked over the coals as Amelia Tan's biggest traitor. What did you say just now?
The hero who brought down the white whale. I do not wish to be so shameless as to claim your exploits as my own house's feats.
Returning her gaze from the corpse of the white whale, Crusch's expression seemed to impale Subaru like a sword. Subaru blinked at the sincere glint in her eyes, turning to face her squarely. As he did so, Crusch gently put a hand to her own breast and stated,
I cannot thank you enough for your cooperation. Were it not for you, we would have failed to subjugate the white whale, and I would have surely fallen halfway along my path.
Speaking those words, she adopted a stance of deep thanks towards Subaru. Subaru unwittingly froze at the heat of the noble Crusch's sincere gesture of thanks. He had no memory of any human being in her kind of position speaking such words to him ever.
No, cut that out. I didn't do anything big like that.
You discerned the time and place the white whale would appear. By your efforts, the expeditionary force, insufficient in strength, was bolstered. When the knight's morale was broken, you roused them. You proposed a plan to rescue the hopeless situation at great danger to yourself, and on top of that, you executed it splendidly, guiding us to victory.
When Subaru replied with halting words, Crusch enumerated Subaru's actions during the battle and their results, told of his own actions in such an orderly manner, and examining the result, Subaru could only conclude,
Sounds like nothing but the work of a crazy man if I do say so myself.
Perhaps it would not be accurate to compare your actions to that of a ferocious, raging lion. However, there is no mistaking that you were the driving force behind this battle. If others should belittle your actions, I swear upon my honor that I shall correct them.
Crusch extolled Subaru honestly, and with a serious look, without any calculation or hesitation. Surely she, the living embodiment of sincerity, truly had not a single smidgen of falseness in the words of gratitude she had spoken. Thinking back to the relationship he had with Crusch until the night before their departure, Subaru could only make a strained smile.
I'm surprised. Seems like your assessment of me has improved quite a bit.
This is nothing to be modest about, and I am compelled to recognize that my view of you until a short time ago was very mistaken. Properly speaking, a suitable repayment for such achievements would be to welcome you into my own house, but
I'll have to pass on that.
Crusch had narrowed her eyes and, in a low voice, invited Subaru to her own side. But Subaru raised a hand and interrupted her cordial invitation.
It's not the same thing as loyalty, but my trust's already been put where it ought to be. I genuinely feel like you're a good person, and you'd probably do a great job if you became king. But Crusch would no doubt be a king to nobly lead the people more than any other. Such was the extent of her character, and he knew just a tiny bit about the powerful reason that compelled her to act in such a manner. A proper reason and the resolve to endure was probably something she'd inherited, entrusted by another. This included everything had served to shape the lone woman known as Crusch Karsten. A small human being like Subaru, who'd continued lying to everyone, could only look at her dazzling form in admiration and envy. I will make Amelia king. Not for anyone's sake. It's what I want to do.
though I understood as much, to think your reply would be to that extent.
Subaru's reply made Crusch's lips break into a broad grin as she drew her chin back. Then she uncrossed her arms, hardened her white fingers into a fist, and pointed it towards Subaru.
Very well. Your exploits shall be repaid in a different form. I swear upon the name of Crusch Karsten that this promise shall be fulfilled.
So solemnly declaring, Crusch opened her hardened fist and looked at her own palm. From then, the tone of her voice dropped slightly as she said,
Now that I think of it, this is the first time I have felt so good about having an invitation of mine rejected. It is a most refreshing sense of defeat, and I can make no show of being troubled by it.
Crusch, I think you're an incredible person. If I were out here on my own, I think it's a sure thing that I'd let that hand prop me up. If he had nowhere to go back to, with nothing certain in his life, and someone on Crusch's level offered him her hand, he'd likely leap at the chance without hesitation and cling to her, relying on her for everything. But the current Subaru had someone else whose hand he wanted to reach out and hold, someone with a wavering back he would support with his own palm. Thus, he could not take her hand, but I'm counting on you for the alliance thing. Even if we've got to become rivals in the end, we can probably get along nicely till then, so let's do that.
Subaru Natsuki, I shall correct one thought of yours.
Subaru's reply made Crusch's smile vanish. She put on a solemn face and pursed her lips, surprised at feeling the atmosphere grow tense once more. Subaru's eyes widened as he looked at Crusch. To him, Crusch raised a finger, then pointed it at herself.
I shall regard you favorably, even when the time comes to determine my mate. Even if the day we must part ways shall inevitably come, I shall never forget my debt of gratitude toward you this day. Furthermore, even should a time of rivalry come, I shall regard you with the greatest favorability and respect.
Crusch lowered her arm with the raised finger downward, firmly declaring it in a crystal-clear tone of voice. This time, her conduct sent a chill running up Subaru's spine. It was not a negative feeling. It was simply his feeling, overpowered by something so grand. This was the woman named Crusch Karsten, Duchess of the House of Karsten.
This would be a pretty dangerous spot if the number 1 and number 2 places in my heart weren't already taken.
I am not thinking as far as accompanying you as a woman. Though my heartstrings have been tugged upon in certain places, my heart is set on fulfilling a dream, and so it shall remain, until some day I achieve the dream he yearned for.
Subaru tried to gloss over his agitation with flippant words, and Crusch smiled thinly as she replied. But the latter half of her words became extremely soft, and those did not reach Subaru's ears. With a blink, Crusch forgot that sentiment, going, "Now then," as she continued her words with a sober glance.
If possible, at this juncture I would like to return to the royal capital with the wounded and the white whale's corpse. But it seems some mission yet remains for you.
Can tell that 'cause of the blessing, huh?
The power of the blessing is not necessary. I know that look in a man's eyes.
Crusch closed one eye, peering into Subaru's eyes as she replied thusly. Then, she checked Subaru's appearance from head to toe and said,
Surely you are not without injury, so you have something you must do in spite of that.
I've got to do it whether I'm hurt badly or not. In one sense, the whale hunt was so that I could do it. I feel bad saying it like that, though.
Oh, really? After subjugating the white whale?
He said it in a way that surely came off poorly, but Crusch showed no sign of annoyance. She seemed curious about the objective Subaru spoke of so seriously.
Most interesting. You surely took the alliance with our house in account for that. If so, it is hardly unthinkable for you to request something of us. You require aid?
I do, but to be honest, I didn't think it'd be this tough, so...
Subaru's shoulders sank when he looked over the expeditionary force members wounded far beyond his plans. With the subjugation of the white whale finished, it meant returning to the Mather's domain, where Emilio waited, and confronting the abominable group there. Fighting such a powerful foe required Crusch's power, but...
With all these people hurt, I won't ask anything reckless of you. Besides, you have to see this with not just your personal feelings but your place as a ruler. Asking you to lend a hand beyond this is just...
Then how about using these old bones until they fail?
Abruptly, a tall figure walked over with quiet footsteps and interrupted the conversation. Wilhelm, the aged swordsman still appearing as ghastly as before, his entire body bathed in demon beast blood. The sword devil approached, walking with a gait that showed nothing of the wounds to his flesh, and offered the treasured sword in his right hand to Crusch.
Lady Crusch, I return that which you lent to me. In addition, let me offer my thanks concerning this matter from the bottom of my heart. It is because of your cooperation that my long-cherished wish has been granted, Lady Crusch. Thank you very much.
Your long-cherished wish and my objectives aligned. That is all. You may hold on to that sword for a little while longer. You can serve no role unarmed.
As you wish. My thanks.
Crusch responded briefly to Wilhelm's words of thanks and looked at Subaru. Accepting her reply, Wilhelm turned his head back to Subaru as well. Now that they were in close quarters again, the stench of blood wafting around him was incredible, and Subaru felt nervous from that surging, aimless antagonism, which felt like a slender blade poking into his liver. But the tense atmosphere from before the battle, that had been lifted, and it was a fact that Wilhelm seemed like his spirits had been lifted with it. The aged swordsman looked straight at Subaru and, after that, fell to one knee on the spot. It was a gesture demonstrating the greatest of all respect to another, one he had seen the night before they'd set out. And then,
Sir Subaru Natsuki, it is because of your cooperation that this subjugation of the white whale was successful. It is you who has granted meaning to all the long years of my life until this day. I thank you. I thank you. I offer my thanks, with the whole of my being on the line.
this was Wilhelm, he who had offered half his life to the sword and then spent over a decade of life devoted to vengeance. Subaru, engulfed by the vast passion of the gratitude such a man directed to him, was so afraid of blurting out the wrong thing that he was at a complete loss for words. It took a while to settle his mind, waiting for the proper words to direct to the old man before him to coalesce, for it would not do to have Wilhelm, a man of such resolve, put on such a shameful display.
It's your own sword that did it, Wilhelm. You thought about how to fight the white whale, you studied it, you trained, you didn't give up, you fought it. Having tasted setback after setback over and over, he must have been on the verge of giving up his grudge. Subaru didn't think he'd thrown everything away, never once attempted to abandon those deep-rooted convictions. It was Subaru who knew more than anyone about the weakness of the heart, about being defeated, about being obstructed by the irrationalities of fate. Who could understand the suffering Wilhelm had undergone until his strong feelings went fulfilled? You stuck with it until the white whale went down because you really loved your wife. If I helped with that even a little bit, I'm glad. I'm not sure this is the best thing to say, but congratulations and well done.
Prompted by Subaru's words, Wilhelm lifted his face, his blue eyes opening wide. Subaru had arbitrarily drawn comparisons between what he felt and what he imagined Wilhelm felt. He didn't think his brief words from just then could convey that, and for Subaru to speak as if he understood probably didn't amuse Wilhelm. But Subaru couldn't restrain his desire to say it anyway. Words to thank Wilhelm for his love for his departed wife still burning 14 years on, and for his labors continuing to fight fate day after day, until they led him to victory.
I thank you.
Briefly, and with a quavering voice, that was how Wilhelm replied. After that, he leaned forward slightly, and after a silence of but several seconds, he rose to his feet. Then, he turned his gaze to Crusch, and when she nodded, he said,
I have received Lady Crusch's permission. Sir Subaru, I place this body in your hands. Please use it to the fullest for your objective.
That's super helpful, but you're serious?
When he glanced at Crusch to make sure, she drew her chin in and nodded affirmatively. When he looked Wilhelm over in all seriousness, he felt both the dependability and the fearsomeness of the man, his antagonism undiminished in spite of having one arm wounded. To Subaru, Wilhelm's cooperation was a wish come true. In the current situation, where every bit of fighting strength was desperately yearned for, he wanted the sword devil's strength enough that a hand might sprout from his own throat. But even an amateur like him could see that Wilhelm's injuries were grave. In the face of Subaru's doubts, Crusch shook her head.
That is not a problem, Ferris.
Yes, Lady Crusch.
When Crusch called sharply, Ferris seemed to instantly glide into view in response. With a skip in his step, he lined up alongside Crusch, and as the kitty ears on his head made a little flutter, he said,
What is it, Lady Crusch? Fairy's in the middle of going all around and doing a big job, but of course I'll prioritize anything Lady Crusch has to ask before everything else. Hey, don't drop your responsibilities halfway through the sentence.
Ferris, the butt of Subaru's comment about easily casting aside all sense of duty as a healer. made a sour face. He was still like that when Crusch gazed at the expeditionary force and asked him,
How many of the wounded are in mortal peril?
I'm treating gravely wounded people, but I can clearly say the number in peril is 0. Other people's field dressings were excellent, and I am a capable kitty, so it's okay to praise me, meow.
With Ferris flirtingly touching a finger to his cheek, Subaru put a hand to his chest in relief. At the very least, Rem didn't seem to be in any serious danger. The exchange after the battle had been decided had put him at ease, but hearing all over again that she was safe was a relief nonetheless. In the meantime, Crusch nodded as she stroked Ferris's head.
Understood. So the remaining wounded can be transported. Ferris, you can leave the existing healing as it is. Then, afterward you will accompany Subaru Natsuki and fulfill the role of his ally.
It was Subaru who raised his voice in surprise at the order Crusch issued. She was splitting Ferris off and making him accompany Subaru. That order meant nothing less than prioritizing her ally Subaru over her own camp's wounded. Of course, Ferris would object to Crusch's decision to split him off from the Crusch Ka.
Understood. Ferry will accompany Subaru from here. I'll have to heal Old Man Will on the road anyway. Meow.
Quite the trouble for you.
Old Man Will's the one swinging his sword, so that makes it about even. Meow?
There was no beating these people. Ferris accepted the order like it was a matter of course, and Wilhelm betrayed no expression of surprise at the order either. Subaru couldn't conceal his bewilderment at the interplay between the two servants and their master. With Subaru in such disarray, Ferris glided his eyes over to him and said,
So that means half of the people left in the expeditionary force look all right? About 20 people, give or take. They'll be coming to cooperate with you, Subaru. Take good care of us.
That's putting it pretty lightly. You're okay with this.
Okay with what, meow?
Would they mean what? Lots of things. Can you trust my judgment?
As far as he could remember, back in the royal capital, there had been none he'd come into contact with that had acted to gouge more wounds in him than Ferris. No matter how friendly a smile came over his face, no matter how adorable the attitude he dressed it up in, Subaru somehow understood that he harbored a deep disdain for Subaru's weakness. Subaru naturally thought that he'd feel reluctant to follow such a person. But
It's not that I trust you, Subaru. It's that I have faith in Lady Crusch's decision that Subaru is to be trusted. It's not like she's wrong, meow.
Oh, thanks.
Ferris laughed loudly, as if rubbing Subaru's thoughts into his face. That behavior made Subaru feel guilty, and while his words caught in his throat, he somehow expressed his thanks. Ferris's smile deepened when he added in a little voice,
It's a bit like you're disgusted by the one most like yourself.
Did you say something just now?
Not real why, nothing. Ah, that's right.
Leaving the unclear statement hazy, Ferris deliberately clapped his hands together and said,
I forgot to mention this, but Rem's holding the fort. Or rather, she'll go back to the capital with Lady Crusch and get some rest. Understand? Meow?
Why?
When Ferris made that declaration with a wink, a strong voice of protest arose. It came from a line of wounded, from which Rem had overheard the exchange. She glared powerfully at Ferris as she asserted,
I will be all right. Why would I not be with Subaru when he is heading into such danger from here on?
That's what you say, but your body won't move, meow. You pretty much took out one white whale all by yourself, and you fired off high-end magic back-to-back on top of that. Rem, your body's really depleted right now, scraping the bottom of the barrel? Meow. As a healer, I cannot allow you to push yourself any further. Understand?
But
I cannot accept it. Rem surely meant to get up and protest. But when she tried to even sit up, she could put no strength into her arm, and with it unable to support her shaking body, she threatened to tumble over on the spot. Subaru hurried close and gently supported her shoulder.
It's too dangerous. I'm begging you, do as Ferris says. Don't do anything crazy.
But I do not want this. It hurts. I cannot bear it.
As Rem looked back at Subaru, now beside her, large tears filled her blue eyes. It was not being left behind that she feared. No, what she feared more than anything was,
When you are in distress, Subaru, I want to be the one offering my hand faster than anyone. When you hesitate along your path, I want to be the one pushing on your back. When you challenge something, I want to be at your side, stopping you from shaking. That is all I wish for. So please,
You don't need to worry about any of that stuff.
Era?
naturally. Rem's tearful-sounding voice weaving those lovely words brought a bashful expression to Subaru's face. Supporting her shoulder, he gently stroked her head as he said,
You've been holding my hand nonstop, and you've pushed my back lots of times. When I'm shaking, just thinking of you lets me manage somehow. You've been saving me all this time.
Ah,
It's all right, Rem. I'll manage somehow, all of it. I'm your hero. I decided this was the first step toward that, so you don't need to worry.
When her quivering eyes looked up at Subaru, her cheeks grew red and hot. With her like that, Subaru turned a smiling face toward her, baring his teeth as he smiled ferociously.
The whale hunt's done already. Your hero's super bedeviled, I guess.
Subaru.
Unable to restrain the emotions welling up inside her, Rem's call of Subaru's name faltered midway. From there, she seemed to anguish, as if restraining her impulses over and over, and after breathing in several times, the tears she could not hold back trickled from the corners of her eyes.
yes, my hero is the greatest in the whole world.
She cried with a smile on her face. Crusch gathered up the wounded, Rem included, and the head of the white whale, and departed for the royal capital. Half of the remaining expeditionary force escorted Crusch, and the other half went with Subaru, heading for the Mather's domain. Headed by Wilhelm and Ferris, the expeditionary force accompanying Subaru amounted to 24 souls. It was somewhat below the numbers Subaru had hoped for, but it was reassuring fighting strength nonetheless. Besides, it was not just people from the expeditionary force accompanying him, but also
Captain, Mimi worked hard too. Worked incredibly super hard.
two beast people were riding ligers as they quarreled loudly. One was Ricardo, recovered after withdrawing from the battle lines after being wounded shielding Subaru. The other was Mimi, who had not lost any of her childish extravagance, even amid a battle with her life on the line. It was not only the two of them joining the battle, but also the 10-odd surviving members of the Beastman mercenary band, the Iron Fangs. Apparently the other lieutenant, Hetaro, had taken command of the wounded, returning to the capital with Crusch.
Come to think of it, how did your little bro get that wiped out when you're that full of energy?
Taro's a little weakling. Goodness, so pathetic.
Mimi cackled, laughing loudly as she made sport of her little brother's weakness, but Subaru judged that it was probably just the older sister's stupid amount of endurance. She was the berserker type who couldn't help laughing in battle, or more precisely, an extremely positive thinker who saw fun in everything. Subaru couldn't help being envious.
Welp, I didn't do much for the last half of the whale butt kicking, but don't worry. The Lady Anastasia asked nice and proper. I'll be doing plenty for the real job coming up.
The real job? Wait, you know what I'm trying to do.
Tangle with the witch cult, right.
The words Ricardo quietly spoke made Subaru's throat tighten. Naturally, when he strongly gripped the reins of Patlash, the land dragon bearing his weight, he heard the pitch Black Dragon make a little sound of concern for him. Seeing the side of Subaru's tense face like that, Ricardo bared his sharp fangs and smiled.
Go ahead and look surprised. To merchants, fresh info comes number one, and the miss has us on the payroll for a reason. We don't have these ears for nothing. They pick up lots of things, not just 'bout you.
That's right. Mimi's awesome.
I wasn't talking about you, runt!
Mimi's reaction threw Ricardo's joke off on a tangent, earning a strained smile from him. While standing on the side, Subaru scratched his head, feeling surprised at Anastasia's poor actions. That said, now that they were sticking together thereafter, sharing info with Ricardo and the other Iron Fangs was inevitable. If possible, he'd love to sit everyone down, expeditionary force included, and properly talk things over. And along with them, the insurance Subaru had arranged before departure, though he didn't know if it would work, or...
Oh, looks like we can link up.
Besides Subaru, sunk in thought, Ricardo's eyes faced forward when he suddenly spoke those words. Subaru's gaze quickly followed suit, but he could see nothing through the darkness of the plains at night. Unable to see what Ricardo did, all he could do was tilt his head.
You don't have to strain like that. I can tell they're waiting for us. Relax.
So says the guy who can tell, sheesh, showing off and all.
Hey, if you've got it, flaunt it. They're a bit far, but coming from that away is the other half of our band of mercs.
Half?
Subaru nodded his brows at Ricardo's words. The other half of the Iron Fangs ought to have meant the wounded withdrawing to the royal capital, but...
By half, I mean exactly that. We put only half the members of the Iron Fangs on bringing down the White Whale. The other half had the other half to do.
Doing what? Doing what?
Had to make sure no other humans on the highway got involved in the fight, right? So they were shutting off the highway from the other side. They set out during last night, so you never had a chance to meet any of them.
Hearing Ricardo's explanation, Subaru accepted it, drawing in his chin. He wasn't exactly thrilled they hadn't devoted all their forces to subduing the White Whale, but they had lent Ricardo and Mimi their main combat strength. Considering that the subjugation failing might have meant complete annihilation, Anastasio wasn't wrong to hedge against that risk. He just didn't have to like it. It was Subaru's envy at work, for he had few cards in his hand and no options save tossing fastballs full force.
So the ones coming now are the rest of your buddies. Who's leading them?
Mimi's younger brother, TB. He can do combo boomies with Mimi just like Hetero. Incredible!
Mimi stuck her chest out as she proudly replied to Subaru's inquiry. Just from hearing her vague, energetic reply, he had some concerns about their remaining comrades.
But that younger brother was a straight shooter. Does this younger brother take after the sis the bro, or is it 50-50?
I get why you're worried, but TB's the smartest o' the bunch. He handles our accounting and negotiations, and he's the lady's right-hand man. He's an expert at handline Mimi, so he's a step up over Hetero there.
Don't say that. I'm gonna feel bad for Hetero.
The various rankings the older sister and the captain had issued made Hetero something of a tragic figure. Either way, setting pity for him aside, Iron Fang's reinforcements was good news. It was surely best to link up with them, then talk to everyone, and think about what was to come. A strategy session aimed at the awaiting witch cult, Wilhelm and the others from the Crusch camp had likely surmised the circumstances. The problem was how Subaru would explain it. Just like with the White Whale, he had to explain things without touching upon return by death.
But that's not an easy thing to do, men.
As Subaru's brain agonized, he saw a pack of ligers kicking up a dust cloud up ahead. Just as Ricardo had said, this was the other Iron Fangs group linking up with them. However, Subaru felt unease, with a corner of his head giving off an uneasy feeling. Subaru's eyes strained, and then he discovered the source. Among the pack of ligers, there was a single figure to the fore with characteristics differing from those around it. As the distance closed, and as those vague contours became better defined, Subaru understood that those characteristics were that of a land dragon. And mounted atop that blue land dragon was...
Why are you here?
That is quite a thing to say to one's reinforcements. Most typical of you.
Both groups stopped, and Subaru, still on his land dragon, faced the individual. His pale violet hair was meticulously combed. His body was clad in the solemn white armor of a knight of the royal guard, and the corners of his handsome mouth were curled up in a thin smile. Subaru stared at the elegant figure before him, connected to him by karma, Julius Juculius. As Patlash furled the folds of its nose, the blue land dragon before it screeched with a sharp glare. Subaru stroked its neck, trying to pacify the comrade that felt the same way he did. Though they had not yet been together long, the bond between Subaru and Patslash had been strengthened by escaping the edge of death together. Subaru felt like Patslash's thoughts were conveyed straight through the reins.
This might trouble you at an inopportune moment, but could you stop soliciting my land dragon? Your land dragon seems quite fine as well, but such invitation goes too far.
Hey, Patslash! Why, you are flirting. I go thinking we feel the same way and you betray me. Chasing tail before a do-or-die battle?
Hey, bro! That land dragon don't want to hear that from ya. You were checking it out so much before we left and all? Besides, bro, your land dragon's female.
Wait, you're a lady?
Patslash, the center of discussion, looked annoyed at Subaru's surprise over his partner's gender. Seeing Julius shrug his shoulders at the exchange, his statement just earlier seemed to be an unfunny joke. Subaru was about to yell at him for it, but before he could, Ferris cut in.
Why, it's quite something to meet you in a place like this. Julius, we were fighting for our lives until just a few hours ago. Meow.
I have nothing I can say in my defense. However, I must correct you, Ferris. I am not the individual known as Julius. Let us see. I shall call myself Vuley.
When Ferris stared and offered sarcasm, Julius toyed back with a serious face. Everyone was giving him cold looks for his meaningless use of an alias, but he accepted their gazes with a slight, serene smile and said,
If, for argument's sake, an individual of knightly rank were to join a band of hirelings, it could only mean he had fallen to the station of mercenary. Thus, it is untrue that the knight named Julius Juculius has joined the Iron Fangs, but rather the lone man before you named Julie.
I see. Meow. Typical. Families with proper chivalry are so much trouble. Fairies so glad to be from fallen nobility.
I do not think of being a knight as troublesome at all. I believe the only problem lies in the willingness to help out a friend. Coincidentally, I should also declare that the punishment by house arrest received by Julius Juculius was last night. So whereupon the day has changed, it has been lifted.
Putting up all those stupid distractions. Is there even a point to an alias then?
Listening to the conversation between Ferris and Julius, Subaru clicked his tongue and levied abuse. Averting his gaze with a twist of his lips, it felt like he was pouting, but given that this was actually the case, he could make no excuse for it. Hearing such abuse from Subaru, Julius abruptly looked his way, advancing his land dragon forward to take a position directly facing Subaru when he remarked,
It is good you are in better spirits than I expected. I wondered about the condition of your body.
Julius's statement of concern for his physical condition made something in Subaru's brain audibly snap. Although Subaru's humiliation was nearly 2 weeks ago from his perspective, if only a few days from Julius's, the question, which could only come off as some kind of dry sarcasm, was more than enough to make him remember. As a slap in the face, the statement delivered like nothing else could, and Subaru just barely managed to lock his jeers in his own throat. Holding his anger in, he cleared his throat, took a deep breath, put on a calm face, and gave his short forelocks a little flick.
Yeah, well, it was just a scratch, right? Like a little spit and polish and I was all better. Anyway, aren't you a little late to think of yourself as reinforcements? What? Were you busy writing apologies to the higher-ups because you got serious against an amateur?
Subaru countered with his specialty, fanning the flames, using a guess based on the house arrest punishment he previously heard discussed. As he did so, Julius's face grew sterner, ever so slightly daunted.
I did not wish to speak of that, but rather, the valiant wounds sustained from the subjugation of the white whale, but it is good that those scrapes have healed as well. In the first place, the wounds should not have been as severe as they appeared, though you rolled around in exaggerated pain, specializing in earning sympathy as you are.
Ha 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 ha!
Hoo! As the two exchanged dry laughter between them, the atmosphere began to feel like a powder keg. When Subaru thought of how those around him were taking this, he saw that Ferris and Ricardo were watching with the look of amused bystanders, while Mimi mingled with the other group in search of her younger brother. Naturally, the duty of calming things down fell to...
It is good to warm over old friendships, but perhaps this is not an appropriate time.
Advancing to the fore, riding a land dragon and making that argument, was an aged swordsman, Wilhelm. Reproaching the two as they glared at each other, his calm blue eyes reflected Julius within them as he said,
I cannot thank you enough for coming in aid. Our fighting strength is rather depleted from the battle with the white whale. As a man coming along for his own self-satisfaction, I was concerned.
Wilhelm, that's not.
When Wilhelm lowered the tone of his voice and stated that, Subaru interjected. To Subaru, subjugating the white whale was the first must-clear hurdle on his list. Subaru had intervened firmly out of his own self-interest, so he could not possibly think of Wilhelm as a burden. It pained him that he could not explain everything, but he at least wanted to wipe away that sense of being indebted. But before Subaru could raise his voice.
It is a fine face that you have become able to make, Master Wilhelm.
In a quiet voice, it was Julius who addressed Wilhelm. Moved by Wilhelm's eyes, which no longer looked haunted, he nodded deeply and said,
It is as if you are a different man from the one I met previously. Surely this shall also be some small comfort to Reinhard.
I suppose it might.
Wilhelm put a hand to his chin and lowered his eyes. How deep, Subaru wondered. Must the conflict within the old man's chest have been to give rise to that momentary hesitation? The various people around them took their exchange in a variety of ways. Sympathy, relief, knowing the circumstances, many must have had those reactions. Subaru, the only one not to know, was left behind.
Regarding that, I was unable to face up to it. Even if he did no wrong, even if he meant no harm, I could not forgive him. One day, I shall pay the consequences.
Even those thoughts alone are surely enough to ease his heart.
Wilhelm held back something bitter in his reply, but Julius took his words well. Then he slowly turned a gentle gaze back towards Subaru, as if all was water under the bridge. Naturally, Subaru girded himself for a resumption of the earlier war of words, but
I must give you my thanks.
In front of Subaru, unwittingly raising his voice, Julius lightly hopped off his land dragon onto the ground. Then, he looked up at Subaru, still riding Pat/, and went down on one knee.
Properly speaking, this subjugation of the white whale was the long-standing desire of the Knights of the Royal Guard. For bringing a final end to the disaster neglected by every nation for many years, I thank thee.
When he proceeded to display his gratitude with an elegant gesture, Subaru, who had held only enmity toward Julius to date, was unable to muster an immediate reaction. Meanwhile, beside the perplexed Subaru, Ferris interjected.
Now, hold on. Don't misunderstand, the subjugation of the white whale was led by the Duchess of Karsten, so it's Lady Crusch's achievement, meow. And importantly, Old Man Will's the one who slew it.
I understand very well that there is no power within him to directly slay the white whale, having heard from Julius, who crossed swords with him directly.
Julius showed every sign of sticking to the notion that he was the mercenary Julie to the bitter end. But having recognized Ferris's statement, he continued his words.
However, there is no mistaking that his existence was a major impetus for the subjugation of the white whale. Ferris, is it not right that you, too, acknowledge this?
That may be so. Meow.
When that was pointed out to him, Ferris hemmed and hawed as he wilted. Having put those kitty ears in their place, Julius turned his gaze to Subaru once more.
Thanks to you, people can forget the days they spent in fear of the mist. Lady Anastasia shall surely be overjoyed as well.
Even though I can accept the first half straight up, it's a lot harder to accept that second half as is.
And my friend can begin to put his regret of many years behind him.
Subaru understood that by friend, he probably meant a certain red-haired hero, but Subaru didn't know the fine details of what regrets that complete superhuman had harbored for many years. Did someone like him really have a past he needed to regret? At any rate, Subaru had no intention of fiddling with how to take all those words. It was right to be happy for Wilhelm having achieved his long-cherished desire, and at the very least, he recognized that his own cooperation had been useful to that end. But even so, Subaru felt extremely conflicted having, ReZero by Tape Nagatsuki. Produced by Six-Tail Novel with Artail, AI. If you are interested in creating your own audiobook like this, visit Artail AI and claim free premium with code ARTAIL. He put on a strong front, but he couldn't wipe away his weakness, flinching and recoiling from the handsome man. Even had he overcome his own weakness, all that awaited him was the unsightly image of a rebellious child having a tantrum.
Even though I felt genuinely grateful for the reinforcements, the fact that it was Julius was hardening my heart enough that deep down, I wanted to give his superior, Anastasia, a piece of my mind.
Taking pains not to let such negative emotions come out onto his face, Subaru exhaled at length.
So in the end, what are you doing here? What did you come for?
You really pulled it off, didn't you?
Julius did not reply to Subaru's question, but somehow, Julius's murmur sounded like he was deeply moved. When Subaru prompted him, he commented, "Nothing," and shook his head before saying,
I wish to ask if you comprehend that the contract with Lady Anastasia lends the iron fangs to Lady Crew, rather, to you, only during the subjugation of the white whale.
Huh? Was that the deal? But I'm sure the lady said that.
Big sis, please be quiet.
Hearing Julius's declaration, Mimi tried to interject, but a little feline beast man with identical facial features sitting right beside her stopped her from doing so. That was probably the talented younger brother. Glancing sidelong at the exchange, Subaru grimaced at Julius's words.
What are you trying to say exactly?
It is a simple story. Having succeeded in subjugating the white whale, we no longer have any reason to cooperate with you. The job is done. Yet here you are, trying to take them somewhere this very moment.
Ah ha 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 ha! Julius, you're so forgetful! The lady said this and that before we left and everything. Mimi's forgotten what it was, though.
Be silent.
Though the kitten-sibling interplay tugged at his mind, Subaru finally grasped what Julius was trying to say. In other words, it went like this.
You want me to choose here and now whether to let the Iron Fangs pull out or stay on as reinforcements.
I am under instructions to sell our services at a high price, you see. Or perhaps our strength is not necessary at this juncture?
Julius indicated the others watching from behind him, pressing Subaru to decide. In spite of himself, Subaru could not easily permit his irritation to slip into the decision. It would be simple to give in to anger and chase them off, but that would be a fool's choice, diminishing his fighting strength while the tallest hurdle loomed ahead of him.
That said, readily accepting the high price Julius had invoked brought its own problems. It was a bad move and negotiations to make promises you couldn't keep, and moreover, my decision had numerous lives and the future of a particular girl hanging on it.
With Subaru pushed into silence, Wilhelm and the others beside him watched without saying a word. Even if Subaru had requested support from them at that juncture, it would turn the negotiation into the Iron Fangs entering the employ of the Crusch camp. But that would only serve to create one obligation to satisfy another. At present, Crusch was lending support to Subaru from a position of equality between them. Put bluntly, he didn't want to upset that balance. When he looked next at the mercenary band under Ricardo's command, Ricardo was folding his arms, keeping his silence. Beside him, Mimi copied her captain, folding her arms as she twitched her ears. When he thought back to Ricardo's earlier display of willingness to fight the witch cult, it all came together. He was getting in Subaru's good graces in anticipation of this negotiation with Julius.
That's dirty. You Kararadi folk sure play dirty.
That's a harsh thing to say to someone. You know, by the way, I ain't really into this whole taking advantage of people's weaknesses thing. I just like money more, so...
You're so shallow, it's depressing. Not that I was expecting more to begin with. Even if I was boss in name only, I still had no intention to seek aid from Ricardo, part of the enemy camp. At any rate, it was disgustingly obvious that the negotiation left me no option but to say yes. Unlike the Crusch camp, lending me help so they could call it even. Anastasia was creating a one-sided debt. It was a painful decision, but there was no move to make save for grudgingly accepting the situation. Declining reinforcements would be a far stupider decision, if only there was some magical means to make the Iron Fangs fight the witch cult under the existing contract.
Magic, magic,
Mist, white whale, and the contract for the highway?
Subaru, searching for some kind of convenient means, suddenly lined up side by side what had been mere words in his head. Upon examination, they seemed to be unconnected terms, but that little nudge made his thoughts burn white hot. Bit by bit, a vague image began to take form inside Subaru's mind, turning into a coherent answer. And then,
How about this? The subjugation of the white whale ain't over yet.
That is an interesting statement.
Julius narrowed his eyes as he replied to Subaru's desperate-sounding words. Subaru's statement unsettled not only the iron fangs behind him, but the expeditionary force as well. Among them, Wilhelm's wide-eyed look tugged especially strongly upon Subaru's conscience, but in a meaning separate from Wilhelm succeeding in his long-cherished aim. It was his idea for addressing a problem that could not be set aside.
It's possible that the white whale is a demon beast acting for the witch cult. I'm aware of people in the witch cult saying something like that. It was the third time around, in other words, the final scene before that world came to an end. Facing off against Petelgeuse in the forest, I'd lost to the madman's unseen hands. After that, I thought Petelgeuse's kicking of Amelia's remains was like he intended to force me to feel powerless. At the time, as the madman's filthy mouth berated me, he definitely ran his mouth to the effect of, "The highway is sealed by the mist, so there is no one to interfere with my love." How did he know that? Why did he speak of it like it was his own doing? And buttressing that was a word spoken afterward by the beast of the end, freezing the world over with its breath. Someone who knew the white whale called it gluttony. If I'm not wrong in thinking that means something to the witch cult, the cause of the demon beast appearing is where I'm heading. If Petelgeuse had called the white whale to the highway, obstructing entry to and exit from the Mather's domain, his objective could have only been to further his own mad ends. In other words, covering the highway in the white whale's mist was preparation for the attack on the mansion and Amelia. The witch cult's got a chip on its shoulder, so we've got to knock it off. With this added, that'll be 4 centuries of failure set straight. When we've done that, then we can say we've finished taking care of the white whale.
Subaru looked Julius' way as he continued with a strong declaration.
The job of the employer is to give orders and dish out rewards. Don't cut out on me midway, Merc. Or are you going to pay compensation for cutting and running? The basis of my statement was so thin that on the inside, even I was amazed. But I was now able to maintain a bold, smiling exterior while saying such a thing. I'd gathered scattered bits of information from each repetition, piling them together to hazard a guess. I'd had that experience several times before, but this time, the guess was on spectacularly thin ground. After all, the crux of the information was gleaned from things I'd overheard while my mind was clouded. Even linking them together in some semblance of coherence, I had no idea if it would sway them. If it could not, at least it could be the thread leading to further negotiations.
I think I shall grant you a passing grade.
Huh?
You could make it sound a little better for our ears, but in general, your claim passes muster. Nor shall Lady Anastasia lose face.
Wait a minute.
Subaru raised his voice in haste at Julius's know-it-all reply. In response, Julius casually looked at the agitated Subaru.
What is it? You need not be concerned. The Iron Fangs shall continue their assistance in accordance with the collateral that has already been paid to Lady Anastasia. There is no problem, is there?
That easy. I mean, what's with that know-it-all stuff? Why you? When I began to voice the words that were to follow, I came to realize a very disagreeable part of myself. Julius had considered my circumstances, cooperating by taking my guess at face value. I just hadn't wanted to notice his benevolence. I wanted Julius to be a hateful person I could never see eye to eye with. I realized the vulgarity of my own feelings in wishing that it were so.
Well, it ain't like we're doing this for free. A dumb robber only takes from you once, but a clever one gets as many chances to take from you as he likes.
Doesn't change that in the end. You're getting hosed, huh?
Ricardo wedged himself into the conversation, and fortunately he was on Subaru's side. In so doing, the easy way became easier, and Subaru hated himself for running from it. When Subaru's self-hatred mixed with the self-hatred of others, things only got worse and worse. But even Subaru knew that. He'd learned it long before.
I'm in the wrong crap, sorry. Damn it, that's not even what I want to say. Even back then, I knew I was.
Putting a hand to his forehead, Subaru finally voiced the logical answer he'd agonized over. However, even though he understood in his head, it was hard to find the words for it. This was where he ought to be thanking Julius for bringing reinforcements and committing to the fight. Now that he could look back at it calmly, he could understand just who had been in the wrong, and that the previous antagonism between them was the result of Subaru's quick temper. Or perhaps even the reason Julius had done what he did at the time was. Julius simply waited, saying nothing to Subaru's difficult words. He surely understood what Subaru wanted to say. If Subaru couldn't say it, and he wanted to get out in front and voice a reply, surely he could. But he did not, and Subaru could not help hating him for not doing so. It would have been so much better if he could simply keep hating the man through and through.
I was wrong. Sorry. I apologize.
To Subaru, they were abominable memories to think back upon, but he'd have had to face them sooner or later, and that was the place. In front of the man he'd have to settle things with someday. Julius closed his eyes at Subaru's apology, slowly drawing in his chin.
Allow me to apologize for my own rudeness. I do not take back everything I said and did in that place, but even so, I take back my belittling of you, from the bottom of my heart.
Those were the words with which Julius answered Subaru's apology. Sincerity flowed from Julius's words, and Subaru knew that the resentful, hateful feelings inside of him had melted away with exceptional ease. Understanding this, he dismounted, standing on the same ground as the knight before him, squarely facing him on a level playing field. He was reflected in the other's yellow eyes, and Subaru's own black eyes reflected in the knight's, as Subaru admitted.
I was wrong, but.
I
really hate you. I think badly of you, and right now I am thankful you came, but I really hate you. I truly, from the bottom of my heart, hate your guts.
The last sentence of his rude declaration was broken up, with shakes of his head to the left and right for extra emphasis, and slammed in the face by all that hostility. Julius looked taken aback. Then, his expression abruptly collapsed.
That is well. After all, I am not very minded to become your friend either.
With that, Julius snobbishly stroked his hair upward and laughed.
To be honest, this sort of thing really isn't my cup of tea. It's like having people watch me with those serious looks is gonna make me blush.
With the group of 50 sitting in a circle, Subaru stood at the center, embarrassed, as he let those words slip. The place was the Liffes Highway, the time was before daybreak, and the participants were everyone in the expeditionary force. The group that had persevered through the battle with the White Whale had been joined by reinforcements, the Iron Fangs under Julius's command, making them a rather large gathering, but the time had arrived when it was necessary to share the objective and information concerning it to all. For that purpose, Subaru had proposed to sort out all their information in one sitting, but
I didn't think I'd be standing in the middle of all these people for it, though.
surrounded by veteran soldiers beginning with the likes of Julius, Ferris, Ricardo, and Wilhelm, Subaru could not help flinching. In the first place, he'd often anguished over his low interpersonal abilities since back in his old world. He was well aware that he lacked experience in standing before people like that, let alone the character to stand above others. But even if Subaru was timid from having them look at him with a certain level of trust in their eyes, he didn't mind it at all. It just put him in quite a bind.
Anyway, let's straighten this out. From here on, we're heading to the Mathers domain, or rather, Rosewell Manor. There, the witch cult will definitely show up.
When he invoked the name of the witch cult, conflicted emotions came over the expressions of various people. Given conversations to that point, there were surely many among them resigned to where it would lead. But even so, it was a different feeling knowing for sure who you were up against. Though, Subaru did not know exactly what this world understood of the witch cult or how they would act on his information.
As far as I'm concerned, though, they're the worst of the worst.
Based on everyone's reactions, they all seemed to share that thought. When Subaru took comfort in that, Julius addressed him casually.
Subaru, how did you come to realize the White Whale and the witch cult are connected?
Ever since Subaru aired his real feelings about their quarrel, Julius's demeanor had softened considerably. To be frank, that transformation left him conflicted in and of itself, but at the moment, answering the question took precedence.
Burns me to say it, but I had a run-in with disciples of the witch cult. I didn't get out unscathed, and I have a pile of bad memories from it, but there was one guy who ran his mouth.
I see. It would seem the knight's guess was not in error.
I suppose not. Meow. The research old man Will put together seemed to come to the same conclusion.
Wait, you knew?
It was mere chance that I noticed the connection. I thought it was unnatural how often the distribution of the white whale's appearances coincided with records of the witch cult's activities. It was nothing firm enough to call concrete evidence, but
To old man Will, the white whale was the main course, and the witch cult is like dessert. Meow. Fairy wasn't sure to believe it or not when hearing about it the first time. Either.
There has been similar talk among the knights. Though, to be precise, they were never considered anything but old wives' tales, tales to amuse one another with.
that is a small wonder.
Listening to their exchange, Subaru roughly scratched at his head and said,
For starters, it's lucky for me that there's a foundation for you to believe what I'm saying. Either way, if we believe what that witch cult guy was saying, or that might not be very trustworthy, but I think it's almost certain they're connected to the white whale. The witch created the white whale to begin with, right?
So it is said. The existence and origins of demon beasts are mysteries to us. Some propagate in the same manner as ordinary living creatures, but some suddenly appear out of nowhere like the white whale, though, properly speaking, the only exceptions on par with the white whale are the black serpent and the great hare.
Feels like some words I shouldn't just let go are flying around, but they scare me, so is it okay if I move on?
Everyone nodded as if to say no problem. Seeing this, Subaru cleared his throat and advanced the conversation. Now that everyone knew that they'd be facing the witch cult, there were things that had to be known to all.
The witch cult's target is Amelia. They intend to burn away the mansion, the nearby village, and everyone inside. That's why we have to drive the bastards off somewhere.
Drive off? Subaru, you're saying a really naive thing. Meow.
Ferris narrowed his eyes in a flirtatious manner. There was a suggestive inflection to his words as he looked at Subaru. It was a sensual gesture that sent a cold shiver up Subaru's spine. However, it still came from a guy.
What do mean naive?
Should not you just cut down every last one of a bunch like that? Given what they've done until now, isn't that the proper and just way to deal with them?
Hearing Ferris unflinchingly propose slaughtering the lot of them, my mouth opened in surprise. It was not the extreme statement that surprised me, but the statement that I myself was naive. Who had gone over and over in my head that they ought to die and had to be killed, was surprised at the change in my mindset that had made me use such soft words. That was probably because the order of what ultimately mattered most had changed inside of me. Right now, to protect the people in the mansion and village, that's fine. Whether it's driving out the witch cult, blowing them away, crushing them, beating them to death, twisting their heads off, turning them into mincemeat, roasting them, pounding them to little bits.
I understand. I see that you're very angry toward them. So,
Darn it. No, you're wrong. I didn't go picking a fight out of anger and hatred, and it's unjust to say I got close to Amelia Tan just on account of that.
No one said anything like that. Meow.
Subaru's anger was gradually rekindled as he spoke, with Julius and Ferris ending up calming him down. However, he also gathered that it was unnecessary to smooth such things over. During the previous go-around, people had tended to distrust Subaru, but apparently, this time people didn't feel even a hint of suspicion about him. That's wrong somehow, thought Subaru, wrapping his head around it, but
After bringing down the white whale at so much risk to yourself, no one's saying anything unjust like that, meow? Subaru, you're surprisingly untrusting of people.
I'm not being untrusting. In fact, I'd experienced Ferris and Crusch doubting me in just those words. But I hadn't just frivolously smiled and acted to hide my misgivings from them. Perhaps that transformation, too, reflected a change in my way of thinking and acting.
In any event, surely there is no room to doubt that the witch cult is on the move. Given their faith and their past activities, it was anticipated, given the fact that Lady Amelia has publicly declared herself a royal selection candidate.
Separate from Subaru's internal thoughts, everyone seemed to be concurring with Julius. Their knowing reaction made Subaru finally voice a question he'd neglected to ask at previous opportunities.
I've wanted to ask this for a while. How did you go from Amelia's name going public to accepting that the witch cult is on the move? It's a bit weird to me how everyone just accepted that so easily. I thought the witch cult was pretty much a mystery to everyone.
You're saying that, considering you know which way the witch cult is moving.
Subaru had expected to be laughed at for his ignorance, so he paid no mind.
Well, there's no time, so let's get on with it. So how'd you get there?
Ain't it weird for the one not knowing to put it like that? Well, ya know to the witch cult that the witch of jealousy, Satella, is more important to them than life itself. You know that, right?
More or less. To be honest, I've only touched on that. I read it in a picture book. That's about it.
Well, of course, it ain't like there's anyone left who's actually seen her. I've only heard of too. Well, if you know that the witch cult disciples worship Satella, it's all good. So you knew that Satella Witch is a half-elf, right?
That too, kinda. That information hadn't been written in the picture book, but I'd heard it when Beatrice had explained the Witch of Jealousy to me. Besides that, even in the royal capital, the issue of Amelia's appearance compared to that of the Witch of Jealousy had come up time and again. Each time, I had indignantly insisted that it was no reason to put her down, but
Amelia's outside appearance is a dead ringer for the witch, right? So back to the witch cult. It's simple to them. A half-elf is in the way, you see.
What?
Subaru, beside himself, unwittingly let his voice jump out of his throat. But from the reactions of those around him, no one else thought anything special of Ricardo's attitude. In other words, it seemed to be a shared opinion.
Why's that? By any normal thinking, not that I'm sure these guys think normally, but normally, why would you persecute someone who's a half-elf, the same as your dear precious witch?
It's 'cause they worship her and think there ain't nothing better than her, that they can't allow someone else that's the same kind, that she's kind of the same but not the same, an imposter.
The voice was exceedingly cold, infused with bloodlust down to its frigid core. Subaru blinked hard and instantly looked toward the individual who had let that voice loose. As he did so, that individual turned to Subaru as well, and the two ended up staring eye to eye. Subaru flinched from that gaze, as if it could see everything inside of him, when the individual said,
Well, that's the guess. Fairy just wanted to try and see. Meow.
The expression easily crumbled as he stuck his tongue out, acting like the atmosphere just then had never existed. Subaru couldn't form the words to follow up on that virtual about-face in his demeanor, but with him so rocked back, Ferris put on an innocent look and leaned forward as he said,
In the first place, the witch cult guys being weird in the head isn't a recent thing, so is it a big deal, meow? With the cult after Lady Amelia, the real problem is who's leading them.
An Archbishop of the 7 deadly sins, I reckon.
Wait, you know that name. Archbishop of the 7 deadly sins. That was the position Petelgeuse had claimed to have, though he had also babbled about being charged with sloth on top of that. The Archbishops of the 7 deadly sins of the witch cult, are they pretty famous?
Well, at least enough people figure they exist. Plus, way back before the Witch of Jealousy went on her big rampage, the titles belonged to witches besides Satella. Pride, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, lust. 6 witches bore the names of those deadly sins, it would seem. Either way, it is said that once Satella claimed the mantle of jealousy, she swallowed all of them.
In other words, witch meant Satella, the witch of jealousy, and other witches of the deadly sins no longer existed within that world.
But, and I do not know if this is the proper wording, I have heard that those in the witch cult acting as leaders have taken the names of those deadly sins in place of the lost witches. Satella is the symbol of jealousy, which is what they worship. In other words, besides that, there are 6 6 Archbishops of Sin.
6. Listening to Julius's explanation, my breath caught at how little was known of the cult we were facing. Since Petelgeuse had claimed to be Sloth, I'd expected that there were others charged with different deadly sins. To me, they were wonderful familiar words straight out of rich middle school subculture. That said, what stopped the term from making my heart flutter was that my first-hand impression of Sloth was just too awful. Were there really 5 more people like that? But we brought down the white whale that was supposedly gluttony, so the other archbishops of the 7 deadly sins should show their faces in the Mather's land where we're headed. It's our chance to take them all out in one shot.
Whoa. So Stwang tilde. But Fairy agrees with the view that this is a chance to squish those witch cult weirdos. They've really underestimated Lugunica, huh?
As with the white whale, they have inflicted damage the world over. The knights have also long suffered at their hands. Many other knights are surely as grateful as I for this opportunity.
Ferris and Julius concurred with Subaru's view, and Ricardo made a belligerent smile as well. Wilhelm responded with merely a solemn nod. That being the case, what Subaru needed to do was make good use of his future information to draft a plan using the fighting strength currently on hand. Though really, the plan itself was exceedingly simple, for all the necessary pieces were already on the board.
Worst case, I'd have to pull this plan off with half the people we have now, but with Julius and them linking up, no more worries about being short on people. I think we can do this.
I would like to correct you about one thing. My name is Julie. Certainly, I am on close terms with the eldest son of the Juculius family, but I would prefer you pay that heed.
In a non-public setting, that's just in the way, you know. It's holding back the conversation.
The key to not slipping up at a critical juncture is to pay heed even during normal times.
If you want to warn people about normal, don't come dressed as a knight of the Royal Guard. You're out of character.
After yelling at Julius for his thin commitment to the ruse, Subaru breathed raggedly while looking at everyone's faces. Then, he cleared his throat.
All right, let's start this. Witch cult hunting made simple so that even a monkey can do it.
With a twist of his mouth and a villainous laugh, Subaru laid out his plan. The moonlight waned, and one could begin to see daybreak over the Lippus plains. It was a quiet beginning to the morning of the last day of that loop.